Who were the M-26-7? M-26-7 is an acronym that stands for El Movimiento 26 de Julio, which in English means the 26th of July movement, and this was the name of a Cuban guerrilla group that fought during the Cuban Revolution and saw the creation of the modern Cuban state as it's known today. The origin of M-26-7 goes back to 1953. And in actual fact, the reason it's named after this date goes back to the 26th of July 1953 to commemorate a failed attack by a group of guerrillas in Cuba. This group of guerrillas was known as El Movimiento, and they were protesting against the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, the dictator of Cuba who had taken power as a dictator in 1952 following a coup d'etat. Batista's regime was backed financially and militarily by the United States, and this led to many Americans having far more privileges in Cuba than many of the poorer Cubans. Batista also sided with the rich landowning classes, and this also meant that towards the end of his regime, around 70% of arable land was owned by foreigners, and that none of the wealth was going to the poorer Cubans. This led to great dissatisfaction, and that's why on the 26th of July 1953, this movement of protest against Batista aimed to take the Barrett's Act Moncada and hopefully from there start a whole nationwide revolution to oust him from power. However, in the end, the attack was very poorly planned, and the army were able to resoundingly defeat the rebels and imprison many others. The most important commander to survive the imprisonment was a certain Fidel Castro. He had been a young lawyer and was running for office at the time of the election when the coup happened. As it turns out, they were released in 1955 following international pressure, and many of the remaining guerrillas went to Mexico, where they vowed to band together and to have another attempt at ousting Batista from power. Along with a few of the other old comrades from El Movimiento, including his brother Raúl, Fidel Castro decided to create a new movement and named it after that fateful date when El Movimiento's plans had gone awry on the 26th of July, and therefore coined the new name for his group El Movimiento de 26 Julio. In 1956, they once again embarked from Mexico to Cuba, clandestinely preparing for a guerrilla mission against Batista. However, they got off to a very rocky start as their yacht was spotted by Cuban soldiers and they were ambushed on the beach. The initial 82 soldiers dwindling to only around 20 surviving the initial landing. They were able to embed themselves in the Sierra Maestra mountains, which are in the very south of Cuba, and from there started a fight back against the Cuban army, which lacked discipline, morale, and good leadership, and so were able to win some crucial early victories against them. One of the most famous members of M-26-7 aside from the Castro brothers was Ernesto Che Guevara. He was a young Argentinian doctor at the time who became very disillusioned with the American influence and presence in Latin America and had therefore decided to join the Castro brothers in Mexico. Putting his medical knowledge to good use, Che eventually became the second in command and became a comandante of another army brigade, and was named by Time magazine as Fidel's brains during his operation in the jungle. M-26-7 remained quite a small organization up until the very end of the war. Numbering only around 400 in 1958, they were active both in the jungle in the Sierra Maestra and later on in other parts of Cuba, but also in urban areas, using acts of sabotage as well as propaganda and slowly winning over the Cuban population, especially those in the working, poorer classes, the campesinos, who a lot of the time were illiterate, by bringing them on their side, by giving them education and medicine and other things that the Batista government were denying from them, and so slowly turning the tide against them. Their aims included the radical redistribution of land for the peasants, as well as available education for those in the lower, particularly rural working classes, as well as industrialization and nationalization of other services and the resumption of free and fair elections. These policies, as well as Batista's increasingly brutal reprisals against civilians, helped to bring most of the population of the lower classes over to the revolutionary side by the end of the war, and the Cuban military started to lose ground against what was really quite a small number of rebels. In 1959, the situation became untenable for Batista's regime when Che Guevara and the advancing column won at the Battle of Santa Clara, not very far from the capital Havana, and the day afterwards the dictator Fulgencio Batista fled to the Dominican Republic, thus bringing the Cuban Revolution to an end. Following the end of the Cuban Revolution, many of the rebels received high-ranking positions in the new Cuban government, which of course after a few years would swing completely to the socialist side of things, and in 1962 M-26-7 would be completely absorbed by the PURSC, standing for the Partido Unido de la Revolución Socialista de Cuba, which is the United Party of the Cuban Socialist Revolution. Of course, it depends on who you ask whether these were socialist heroes who stood up for the poor and downtrodden, or simply guerrillas who meted out terror tactics and summary executions.